First of all, welcome and congratulations on your Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thank you, Steve.
See, your family's here today. Who do we have?
That's all family there.
All of them. I want to start with your family's history. For those who don't know, Michael's grandfather was the Patrick Cudahy, the meat packer of Cudahy fame. Let's start there with his story, an immigrant. What can you tell us about him?
Well, Patrick migrated here in the year 1849. He was 3 months old. By the time he got to the States, he was 6 months old. He came over in one of those things called the coffin ships, and they were sailing ships, and that's how long it took. And then he started working when he was 13, and actually he did some labor before that, even at 11. And I don't think
there were no child labor laws.
There was no child labor, you know. And by the time he was in his late 20s, he had risen in the Plankington Company to being vice president, and later took over the Plankington operation. Then Plankington died, and Patrick, being the entrepreneur that he was, and he was really an entrepreneur, he started his own company called the Patrick Cudahy Company. He's very modest about his name. You notice Marquette is not called Cudahy Electronics. Anyway, he rose to the top, and then he started his own company. That company, by the way, is owned by a Canadian outfit now, and it's way up in the billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Doing fine.
Okay, step ahead to the next generation. Your father, John C. Cudahy, also was a man of note with a remarkable career. He was appointed by FDR to be the U.S. ambassador to Ireland, Poland, and Belgium. And in Michael's autobiography, in reading up prior to this interview, your father was, I want to read a passage from your book real quickly about your father. Ambassador John Cudahy informed Ambassador William C. Bullitt by telephone at 11:15 this morning that the German forces had already overrun the whole of Luxembourg and all of Belgium. There was heavy fighting. Ambassador Cudahy added that he had almost been knocked down by the force of a bomb, which fell 300 feet from the American embassy, and that one of his ears had been deafened by it and was still deaf. A number of windows in the embassy had been shattered. So he left his post. He had to, because the embassy was overrun by Hitler. He comes back to the United States, and then your father was recruited by Life magazine to go back to the war front, and one thing leads to another, and he's a journalist now, and he is granted an interview with Adolf Hitler. He's believed to be the only Western journalist to have interviewed Adolf Hitler. And
That's correct.
it happened at Hitler's private lair, known as the Eagle's Nest. And I want to read to you, keep in mind this was in May of 1941, so the United States had not yet entered World War II, and the extent of the carnage that Hitler was doing. Yeah, we didn't know about that either, I guess, but the extent of the carnage that Hitler was doing was not apparent in the news yet. At least to the rest of the civilized world. So keep in mind, this article that Michael's father wrote was months before Pearl Harbor and our entry into the war. And listen to how Michael's father described his meeting with Hitler. Just this first sentence. Hitler stared at me, and I stared back. That's just a remarkable sentence right there. He continued to stare so long that I wondered if the staring duel would ever end. His expression was one of cold hostility. Finally, he dropped his eyes, and after that only glanced at me casually from time to time. His eyes were truly remarkable and gave the impression of light so intense they were. They were the arresting feature of his face. Harsh, metallic eyes, indicative of an intense, indomitable will geared to a frenzy. Above all, they were unyielding, fanatical eyes. Harsh as the facial lineaments were harsh without one compounding note of sympathy or kindliness. I'd say your father sized up that guy right at the first blush.
Just about right, yeah. You can imagine what that felt like if there were only 5 around the table, and one of them was Adolf Hitler and the other was my father. And it scares me even today to think about it.
Did he ever talk to you about that in later years?
Oh, yes. Well, I was just a kid then. I was
right.
15 or something like that. He said that, well, my father was a great proponent of trying to keep the United States out of the war. You know, it was starting. It was already, Hitler was already rampaging. His theory was that eventually he might even take over England. He asked in that interview whether Hitler's next step would be to take over England. And Hitler said, "You are a fool. You know nothing about military operations. England could be a tough battle, but we'll do that anyway." But then my father said, "Well, then the next step would be the United States." And Hitler said, "That's 3,000 miles across the sea. Couldn't do that." Okay.
So as a child, I'm told that you were Gary Grunow, and for the interview for this most recent story, he said Michael Cudahy has always been a tinkerer. He never is content with the way things are. He always wants to explore. That led to really what became Marquette Electronics, didn't it?
That's correct.
That kind of sense of invention.
Yeah. Well, I'm often credited with all kinds of inventions. I didn't really. Well, there were a few inventions in that operation, but generally speaking, what happened was my partner, Warren Cousins, and I wanted to go into the manufacturing business, and so we were snooping around all over the place, and we happened to come upon a couple of doctors at Northwestern University Medical School, and they were looking for a central electrocardiograph system. Everybody in here, I think, knows what an electrocardiograph is. I hope you do. And Hewlett-Packard was asked if they would do it, and they said no. And then there was a Cambridge Instruments. They were asked, and they said, well, we'll look at it for $100,000. But we were stupid enough, we said, we'll do it. I would have to admit to you that I didn't even know at that point what an electrocardiograph was. But we did it anyway. And it took about a year, and we delivered a system to Northwestern University, and that just set off the whole Marquette Electronics. The system worked very poorly. I spent probably the next year of my life underneath the console, tinkering around with a soldering iron trying to fix it. But we got it working, and from there, Marquette was born.
And you built it with such a unique corporate culture that we'll come back to in a moment. But in your book, you describe that you eventually sell your business to General Electric. You've been known to do business deals with a handshake. So you did a deal with Jack Welch. You flew to New York, I believe, and
right.
Sold your company to Jack Welch with a handshake. What did your book? You had some kind of remorse. You kind of regretted turning over that piece of your company, your vision to a big corporation like GE, didn't you?
Well, we'd finally come to the point where people, the board, and I were both saying, what happens if I get hit by a truck? And what would happen to Marquette? And so I think our feeling, the board's feeling and my feeling was we better consider being acquired, which was fundamentally against my better judgment. But anyway, we went down to New York. Jeff Amelt and I, the guy that is now running GE, and we had lunch with Jack Welch, and I don't think it took more than 2 hours. I think Welch said, well, the trouble with you, Mike, you want too much for your money. And I said, the trouble with you, Welch, is you don't want to pay me enough. Well, he says, I just came out of a board meeting, and the board gave me permission to give you $42 to $44 per share. And I said, well, then you've just already agreed to 44, and I stuck my hand out and we shook. And Welch went sput, sput.
There aren't too many people who got the better of Jack Welch. In talking to some people about you and the way you do business, more than a few mentioned, when I think of Michael Cudahy, I picture him with a glass of early times on the rocks in one hand and a pen writing on the tablecloth at a table at the Lake Park Bistro in the other, sketching out his latest vision, his dream. Is that a apropos description of what you do?
I think that's very accurate. I notice this is in early times. Nonetheless, we can talk some more.
That can be arranged, I'm sure. As a practical matter, I want to get to switch gears. In your book, and you are known for these, you published Cudahy's 10 Golden Rules on How to Run an Organization, which you also consider how not to screw up an organization. I just briefly want to go through 1 to 10 and just get you to amplify what you mean by these kind of Cudahy commandments of doing business that certainly all of the entrepreneurs in the room who are being honored today, I'm certain you'll find useful. Commandment number 1, stay financially independent. Don't let the venture guys in too soon, no matter how difficult it is. What more can you add to that point?
I'll just leave that one. That's all.
Okay. Speaks for itself? All right. Rule number 2, don't have meetings. Meetings are the curse of modern business. Most break up without a decision. If you must get together, do it in the parking lot or have no chairs in the meeting room.
It's better in the parking lot when it's about January.
Number 3, never make an organizational chart. Putting people in boxes always makes some smug and others mad. A true representation of how people work together would look like a Picasso painting, and then, of course, no one would understand it.
Well, I think that the organizational charts, today I still feel that organizational charts are demeaning. I don't, you're in this little box over here, and then they have another thing that they do with them. They put a dotted line from this guy to that guy. What does that mean?
Number 4, promote from within. This one Lawrence Peter said 20 years ago, but it deserves repeating. Obviously, if your company is growing fast, it's hard to do. But if you're continuously going to the outside for talent, you're probably doing something wrong.
Well, I think people in the companies have a tendency to say, we need a real expert for this job or that job. And they never spend enough time looking around at the people that are working for them. There are people who not necessarily will pop up out of the woodwork for that job, but if you look around and you ask people, there are always an abundance of talent within the company. Now, I grant you, as I said, there's a limit. If you don't have a chemist, don't start mixing up chemicals because you'll blow your head off.
Leads us to number 5. Don't hire consultants every time you have a problem.
Well, that's my favorite thing about consultants. You know, if you have a problem that is specific and nobody has the talent to solve that problem, then a consultant is probably what you need. But if it's just plain laziness, which it is a lot of the time, let's put the Ajax Consulting Company in there. They'll figure it out. Why don't you figure it out? You know, that's my feeling about that.
I think I saw 12 consultants run out the door. Have a love affair with your employees. What do you mean by that?
Well, I had 3,500 of them, so that's sort of a
You're a bigger man than I.
Yes. What I mean is, basically, corporations are very cold. They give you a number, that's what you are. They don't act like you're a part of the family. That's what we did. We acted like everybody at Marquette was part of the family.
Everybody I've ever met that worked there said working at Marquette was the greatest experience of their careers.
Well, thank you. That's mighty nice to hear. And that was a philosophy of theirs. You know, the first guy that I hired, Dan Phillips, was a nice guy, and he was doing pretty well. And one of the things I said to myself one day is, hey, what if Dan gets unhappy and leaves? This would be bad. I guess I better get him to like me and like the job. So I made an effort to do so, and then it just grew from that.
It sounds like you're a proponent of the concept of servant leadership, that a leader serves the people who work with him.
Yeah.
Number 7, give away the store to your employees.
Well, I did. At one time or another, you know, if you hold all the stock and all the ownership within your own pockets or pocket, Joe Jones out there doesn't feel like he's a part of it. If he has even one share of stock, it's better than if he has nothing. I noticed, for instance, looking out my window one day, one of the employees was walking in down the walk, and he got up. He went out of his way to pick up some scraps, some pieces of paper. And I thought, isn't that nice? He's proud of this place, and he's proud because it's partly his.
He's got skin in the game.
Yeah. Skin in the game.
Number 8, don't play big shot. No reserved parking or private entrances. No fancy offices and thicker carpets for a chosen few. And let the people do what they want in their own area. Crazy posters, radios, plants, and decorations of any kind. It'll make the place home, and people will show up for work a lot more often. Let peer pressure prevent anything outrageous.
Well, there's another corporation thing that just kills you. The executives are supposed to have thicker carpets, and then there's a guy that comes through and says, oh, you can put your picture of your kids up on that wall, but it only can be this size. Why do they say that? They say it because they're convinced that a decorator has figured out the right size for the picture. This absolutely insults people. We had all sorts of freedom in that regard. people decorated their office any way they wanted. And sometimes it was pretty wild. But this was part of it. We also had, by the way, I don't know if that's in the book, we had a lady who had a gerbil, and she had a gerbil cage, and she brought it to work every day. That's going a little far. The problem was that we were a little bit nervous about the FDA coming through and saying, oh, no, I don't think so.
So it wasn't for experimentation or anything. Number 9, ignore the competition. More people waste more time worrying about what the competition is doing than tending to their own knitting. Just keep a steady course in the direction you feel is best for your customers' needs. Elbow grease is a good substitute for paranoia.
Well, I used to, in light of that, when we went to one of these conventions, medical conventions, we noticed that the competition was forever sneaking around the corner to see if they could find out what we're doing. So I just dedicated one day during the conference for all competition to come and take a look. Anything they wanted to see. You can't photograph software, you know, that's not very easy to do. You can't gain anything by doing that. And the whole point was that we were forever inventing, and they were always trailing behind us. And we let them have it.
Number 10, finally, preserve your sense of humor at all costs. Sure, times get tough, but if business isn't fun anymore, give it up and become a cab driver or bartender. You only live once. Somehow I can picture you thinking that.
Well, it's not wrong being a cab driver or a bartender. I think that's kind of fun. And I think this is another very strong feeling I have. You know, we're taught when you have a little kid about this size, you say, now you do your homework before you go out and play. So play becomes fun and homework becomes agony. If you turned it around the other way, it might be interesting, mightn't it? You could convince people that work is fun. And that's what we did with Marquette Electronics. Work was fun. We used to find, sometimes I go over there on a Sunday to the main plant and just mosey around. And sometimes I'd find some people working there on a Sunday. I asked one gal one time, I said, what you doing here, Mabel? She said, well, it's more peaceful here than it is at home. Besides that, I have some work I have to catch up on.
Well, you're, I believe, 89. So what's next for Michael Cudahy? What in the world haven't you accomplished that you still want to accomplish?
Well, I want to see that whole lakefront development go through, and I think we're getting there. And I presume that all of you in this room know what we're up to. We're going to take that old bus depot down. We're going to put a nice building there. We're going to maybe even have a new music hall down there.
Wow. Well, you're driving that whole thing. I'm told that you're the connector. You're the one who got the various parties to get on the same page. So again, you've changed Milwaukee. And with that in mind, I want to go through the formality of giving you this award for lifetime achievement. The list of past recipients include Sheldon Lubar, Fritz and Deborah Usinger, Stephen Marcus, George Dalton, Robert Kern, Joe Zilber, and Harry Quadracci. So I would say you're in really great company.
I'd say so. Thank you.
And as you can read in the magazine at your table briefly, Aside from city founders Solomon Juneau, Byron Kilbourne, and George Walker, few people, if any, have had more impact on Milwaukee than entrepreneur, community advocate, and philanthropist Michael J. Cudahy. To imagine a Milwaukee without Michael Cudahy would be akin to imagining a Wisconsin without 6,500 GE medical jobs, healthcare jobs, without the Calatrava addition to the Art Museum, without Discovery World, without Pier Wisconsin, without the Dennis Sullivan Schooner, and without the Harbor House on the lakefront, without the Pabst Theater and the Riverside Theater being refurbished, and without the John C. S. Cudahy YMCA. Quite simply, Milwaukee would be a diminished place without Michael Cudahy. On behalf of the community, I want to thank you for your impact, my friend, and I wish you many more years with us.
Thank you, Steve. That's really nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Give me.
Is there anything else you want to say in closing before we continue with our program?
Haven't you said enough? I'm overwhelmed.
Well,
But I thank you, and I thank all of you. I love Milwaukee. I intend to live it to it. I was seeing my cardiologist the other day, and I said, hey, I got a lot of projects going here, you got to keep me alive. He said, Mike, we're doing the best we can.
well, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much. All right? I'll get out of here while I'm ahead.